I want to talk about what a living AI workspace actually looks like because this is something that I've created for myself. And honestly, I could never go back to doing it the old way. And let me explain kind of really what the issue is with training AI on your business and having it help you with things in your business. Most of us are using AI, to chat with, like open up your Claude account or your chat GPT and say, hey, write this email, give me content ideas, help me improve this offer, maybe summarize a transcript, create a launch plan, all that stuff. And it is useful. It's very helpful to be able to have this little brainstorming partner. But the problem is that every conversation needs context. And if you haven't provided that context and you're not manually reminding AI of it, then you're not going to get a good result. And even if you are using things like projects or custom GPTs, most of that knowledge is static, which means it knows what you uploaded. It remembers the version of your business the day that you trained it, but it doesn't automatically know what changed last week. It does not know your current offer unless you update that, right? It doesn't know what ad campaign is running unless you tell it. It doesn't know what your current priorities are unless you feed that back into it. So you end up with a tool that is smart, but it's not truly current. And I think that's the biggest problem that really all of us are trying to solve. So I want to introduce kind of a bigger possibility with this. And it's something that I call the living workspace. And it's more like a business brain, but a place where your AI can access structured files that represent the current state of your business, not one giant messy document, because that's not going to work, not just a random folder full of old PDFs. That's not going to work either. And not even a custom GPT that you trained once and then kind of quit using 3 months later because it's less and less relevant. Or you are using it, but you're continually having to give it more and more context to make it useful. A living workspace is a structured environment where your business knowledge is really organized and it's updated in real time as you work with it, and it's easy for the AI to navigate. And that's the tricky part because that is the problem, again, that we're all trying to solve. So your business brain can include things like your offers, your ideal client profile. It should have your brand voice. If you're doing any current funnels or anything, it should know about that. If you have a content strategy that you use, it should know about that. Maybe any active projects that you're doing, obviously, any offers that you're currently offering. I think I said that first. Your launch plans, your decision history is even helpful because as things change and evolve, it's kind of nice to log that and understand why things changed and any recurring workflows that you do all the time in your business. So, the magic of this living workspace is that it's not just AI that knows your business. The magic is that it can keep working from the latest version of your business. And that's where it gets really, really helpful because the key distinction is that unlike a project or a custom GPT where you upload a PDF, you add a few documents, AI references that information, but the information stays frozen unless you manually replace it, right? So it works fine for some things. If some things are very stable and they don't change all the time, maybe your main brand values or your origin story or whatever your core methodology is, your foundational audience profile, maybe that doesn't change a lot. But a lot of other pieces do because your business moves. And we all know this as entrepreneurs. We are constantly trying new things, testing new things. Change your offer. Maybe you test new messaging in your ads. Maybe you adjust your pricing. Maybe you started a big project and realized that you needed to prioritize something else, right? Maybe you learned from a failed attempt at something, a failed funnel. Maybe you got some new customer feedback that might change the way that you do your messaging. So all of these things really affect the way that we show up in our business every day. And this is where a living workspace is different because a living business workspace, it looks more like your files are all organized by your business function. Your AI knows where to look for each, depending on what you're using it for, it knows where to go find that information. And you update the meaningful changes as they happen in your business. So this way, the workspace becomes more useful the more you use it. It really reflects what your business looks like today, not 3 months ago. Now, I want to be really transparent here and explain that it is not going to magically update everything as you use it. And this is where where we might get to eventually, but we're not there yet, right? So if you think about where ChatGPT was back in 2022 when it just came out, right? It was amazing. It blew all our minds because we'd never seen anything like it. But if you compare it to what ChatGPT is today, it's night and day. Well, AI is just going to continue to get smarter. So this is the worst it's ever going to be right now, right? So at this point, we do have the ability to have a living workspace that updates our memory, but we have to be in charge of that. Because honestly, the way it is right now, you don't want a workspace that remembers everything because not every thought needs to become a file, right? Not every conversation that you have with your eye needs to be saved. Not every random idea belongs in the business brain because that would create bloat. And bloat is one of the bigger risks. So the goal is not to document everything. The goal is to document what matters. So meaningful updates that you might say, yes, we're going to save this, update the business brain would be a new offer, a pricing change, maybe a new ad campaign, maybe a change in your ideal client or a brand decision change. Anything that's major and strategic, a new funnel that you're doing, useful customer insight is great to save in there. So any of those kind of things that you want to make sure it remembers next time. Those are the things that we update. So you're still the CEO of your business. You're not fully outsourcing just because you have a living AI workspace. You're not outsourcing everything. AI does not replace your own discernment on what you keep and what you don't keep. And it's really more about helping you operate from a much more organized, much more current, much more intelligent version of your business. So how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that doesn't create bloat and that allows Claude to maybe just get a small piece of context, just the only thing that it needs to start a conversation, and then know where to go from there to look for everything else. Because what we don't want to happen is we don't want to dump everything into one massive document that Claude has to read every time. That's going to eat up our tokens and be a complete waste. And we also don't want it to go through a folder with a whole bunch of documents in it and have to read all of that. So this is why we need a router concept. So to make this practical for you, I want to talk about what the minimum viable workspace should have, right? It doesn't have to be super complicated, but it does need some structure. So the biggest mistake is people create a giant document, like everything about my business, or they just have a folder full of all kinds of various information that's not really organized and it's sort of like a junk drawer. So what we want to do is give Claude a small orientation file, basically, like a separate workspace index and then some organized folders. So the minimum viable setup would look like this. You got a Claude MD file. Is what Claude's going to read every time you start a conversation. So we want that to be a short orientation file. And it should tell Claude things like who you are, what your business does, what this workspace is for, maybe what your current top priority is, how to behave inside the workspace, any terminology that it should just always know, like you might use acronyms or something it's not familiar with, if you have things like that, when to update files, when not to update files, and where to find the workspace map if it needs it. So to make this practical for you, I would say that the minimum viable workspace needs a few things. It needs, number one, a Claude MD file. And that is just a .md file that is basically like the router or the concierge for your workspace, because we don't want Claude to come in and read an entire folder of stuff. We want it to just read a little bit, all it needs to read, and then from there, it can route to other places in the workspace to read what it needs based on what you're asking it to do. So your Claude MD file should be like no more than 100 lines, maybe 150 tops. And then that way it doesn't use a bunch of tokens every time you talk to it, right? Because it's always going to read this file every time. So that's just going to include basic things like who you are, what your name is, what you want to be called, maybe what your business does, and your main offer, if you just have like one or two main offers that you're focused on to give it some business context, maybe what your current focus is, and then basically like instructions on where to go to look for the rest of it when it needs it. So that's basically a Claude MD file. And then from there, you're going to want to create like a wiki or an index that is basically like a table of contents to everything else in there, right? So if you've got different things like current priorities or my offers folder, my audience profile and branding folder, things like that. You can have different documents inside these folders, and then you create a wiki file that's going to route Claude and tell it like where to go to find all of this information. And then that way, it doesn't take up any more tokens than it needs to. And then as you are working in this environment, this is where you have to kind of start to learn a new behavior in the way that you work with AI, because now you've got your Claude, you've got your wiki, and then you've got your basic folders with all of the information about your business. I also like to do a task MD folder, which is like kind of my brain dump, saying, okay, here's what's going on right now. Like every morning I could just get up and tell Claude, here's what's going on right now. Here's what I want to make sure we get done this week. Based on what I told you yesterday in the task folder, like, am I on track here? What do you think we need to focus on? Sometimes I show up to my workspace and I say, I have 2 hours. What is the most important thing that we work on to move the needle today? And based on, because it already knows everything happening in my business, it's a really good guide for that. This setup only stays meaningful when you update it when things change. So that's the thing. Every time you have a conversation, you're having a conversation from your workspace folder that lives on your laptop or your desktop. And as you create things, Claude will, if you're creating assets, Claude will save anything that it makes, it's going to save to that document or to that folder, right? If you're having a chat back and forth and nothing's saved, it's not going to remember that chat unless you tell it to document that somewhere. So this is where it's kind of up to us to discern what do we want to save, what do we not want to save, and just creating a habit of cleaning up after yourself. It's sort of like if you have a house and you pick up a little bit each day and you kind of clean up after you get one thing out, you clean it up before you bring something else out. That is sort of the maintenance that you have to do with your workspace. And there's certain ways that you can do this a lot easier. Like for me, I created like a sweep skill. It's called this, like sweep the chat. And so if there is something I'm working on that I know is important and I want to document this and save it, I'll say sweep the chat. And that runs this whole script and instructions on what to do to save the important information and where to put it and make sure the wiki is updated, etc. Anything that needs to be updated gets updated. So it's a lot going on that Claude's handling that you don't have to handle, but you do have to remember to say, sweep the chat. I also do a weekly lint process where it goes through and just kind of goes through my wiki, my whole folder, making sure that the links are all active, that if the wiki points somewhere, the thing is really there. Also, like anything that starts to be a couple months old, it can bring to my attention and be like, is this something that we still want to keep or not? And so just little things like that. That's a once a week thing that's done on a schedule for me. I don't have to remember to do it. And then the other one is the chatting, the daily back and forth chatting. You do have to remember to tell it to save. And if you don't have a skill built out for it, you could also just simply say, hey, I want to document this. Let's make sure that we update the workspace accordingly. Any documents that refer to this, let's make sure it's updated with the current information, right? So that's kind of our responsibility. Now, let's talk a little bit about bloat and why this structure matters, because what we want is the workspace to be able to quickly answer the things that we want. We don't want it to have to go waste tokens to go find a bunch of information. So this is really why that folder structure is important. And this is also why naming conventions matter. I'm terrible with naming conventions. I will call the same thing 5 different things every time I create it. But Claude isn't. It's very good with this. So the beautiful thing is Claude's going to be creating all these documents and saving them for you. So it's hard. I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but the raw information that you bring in, and by raw, I mean Claude hasn't processed it yet. Maybe it's your PDFs and your brand guide, things that you've already created. It would go into the raw category, and then Claude can create the naming structure and save what's relevant into the folder so that it matches up with the wiki. So all of this goes on behind the scenes. You don't have to know how to do it. It's really quite amazing, because then what happens is once you have this working, right, you've got your hygiene set up, you remember to sweep the chat when something changes. And hey, if you forget, by the way, and you went on to something else in a new chat, go back to the chat. It's still going to be there and sweep it then. So you can also do that. But it's not like the second you get out, you're going to lose it. It'll remember the chat. You'll just have to go back and do that. But once you get the system set, you're kind of used to working in it, you're going to see how quickly it gets smarter and smarter as it gets more context for your business. Now it gets really exciting because we can move on to the next phase, which is the connectors and the workflows. So for example, if Claude can connect to your CRM or your email platform or your calendar or your Notion or your Google Drive or your Airtable, or, if you're using things like Supabase, your ad dashboards, your Stripe dashboards, all of these things that Claude can connect to. So what I've done is I have connected my CRM. So Claude can literally go draft my emails for me now. Claude can create tags for people, schedule emails for me. So all of these things I can do from my workspace in Claude. Claude's connected to my calendar. Claude is connected to my Google Drive. I can pull up my ads. Meta just recently, just like a few days ago, put forth a CLI that you can use so that you can actually create what's called a living artifact in Claude. So it's connected through the API to Meta. I can just pull up my Meta dashboard right there in Claude and look at what my ads are doing. It's wild. I can do the same thing for Stripe. What, payments are coming out at me, what were my sales for the day. I can do the same thing. Another example of this is I did a workshop, a live workshop funnel to sell my one-on-one services to help people set this very living brain up for themselves in Claude. And I was able to create a living dashboard that connects to my CRM so it knows exactly when somebody signs up and gets put into the funnel. It does a little bit of just public searching intelligence on the person, like who are they, what kind of business do they operate, where are they present online. So I have a little bit of information about them before they even show up. It shows, my basically how many people have signed up. I have a goal of how many registrants I'm looking for. It tracks how close I am to that goal. All of this just lives in my Claude, you guys, and it's connected to my business brain. So it's not perfect. There is a little bit of maintenance that you are responsible for doing, but I'm telling you what, it's worlds away from just using a custom GPT or even a project for your business. It's like, I try to relate this to humans. So it's like if you had a freelancer and you hire them for one thing and you kind of have to brief them from scratch every time because they're not really part of your integral business. It's like that versus having the living workspace, which is like bringing that really smart, brilliant freelancer into your office, giving them access to the file cabinet, the whiteboard, the dashboard, the project list, the current priorities, right? So now they're not just smart, now they're also informed. And informed intelligence is where this leverage is. So anyway, if you're interested in working on this with me to help you build this for yourself, I do offer I should say, I don't know if it's going to be one-on-one very long. My bandwidth is minimal, but I wanted to do this one-on-one before I tried to scale it into something else. So if I'm not still offering one-on-one, I'm at least going to have a cohort option for this, or I might still be offering one-on-one. But in any case, what I am helping you do is build your own living workspace within Claude. Not another custom GPT, not another prompt library, but an actual living workspace that knows your business, that stays organized and can grow with you. So I will leave a link below if you want to check into that. Alternatively, I also have a school community called Futureproof, the Evolution Lab, where there's a lot of AI trainings on things to help you, if you're not quite ready for the level of a business brain. I wouldn't recommend it if you're just starting out, you don't have offers really yet, you're not making income yet. Futureproof is probably the best place to go for that so that you can build your business right the first time using AI to streamline it, help you work smarter and not harder. I'll leave both links below, and thank you so much for watching. Like and follow, and I'll try to be more consistent with posting here.